War crimes are serious violations of the laws of war designed to protect civilians and limit suffering during armed conflict. In the context of the ongoing Russia-Ukraine war, allegations of war crimes have drawn global attention to these rules and why they exist. International organizations, journalists, and prosecutors have documented incidents such as attacks on civilians, destruction of civilian infrastructure, mistreatment of prisoners of war, and forced deportations, raising questions about individual criminal responsibility. The conflict illustrates that modern wars are not lawless. Even during active fighting, international humanitarian law applies, and those suspected of committing war crimes can be investigated and prosecuted, sometimes years after the events themselves. Here are 20 of the most interesting and most frequently mentioned war crimes. 1. Faking surrender is illegal. In other words, perfidy. Perfidy involves pretending to be protected under the laws of war, such as feigning surrender, injury, or civilian status, to deceive the enemy and then attack. This undermines any possibility of trust during combat and makes real surrender more dangerous. Because it exploits humanitarian protections, perfidy is strictly prohibited. 2. Medical personnel and hospitals are protected. Doctors, nurses, ambulances, and medical facilities are considered neutral and exist solely to save lives. Attacking them deprives the wounded and sick of care and spreads unnecessary suffering. They only lose protection if they are actively used to carry out military attacks, and even then, warnings are usually required. 3. Civilians may never be deliberately targeted. Civilians are not participants in hostilities and must be spared from violence. Even when civilians support an enemy politically or morally, they remain protected. Intentionally targeting civilians is one of the gravest war crimes and can amount to crimes against humanity. 4. Prisoners of war must be treated humanely. Once captured, enemy fighters are no longer threats and must be protected. Torture, beatings, sexual violence, public humiliation, or execution are strictly forbidden. Prisoners must receive food, shelter, medical care, and be allowed communication with oversight organizations like the Red Cross. 5. Certain weapons are completely banned. Weapons such as chemical, biological, and some indiscriminate weapons are outlawed because they cause unnecessary suffering or cannot be controlled. These weapons often harm civilians long after fighting ends. Their use is illegal, regardless of military advantage or retaliation claims. 6. Unnecessary destruction of property is illegal. GR. Destroying civilian homes, farmland, factories, or infrastructure without a concrete military reason is prohibited. Scorched earth tactics that leave populations without shelter or resources are unlawful when not strictly required for military operations. 7. Using child soldiers is a war crime. Children are especially vulnerable and lack the capacity to give informed consent. Recruiting or using them as fighters, guards, messengers, or spies robs them of their childhood and causes long-term trauma. International law sets strict age limits and criminal responsibility for violations. 8. Wounded or unconscious enemy fighters must be cared for. Once a combatant is wounded, unconscious, or otherwise incapacitated, they are considered out of the fight. Attacking them is forbidden. Instead, they must be protected and provided medical assistance, regardless of which side they fought for. 9. Combatants must distinguish themselves from civilians. Fighters are required to openly carry arms and distinguish themselves to avoid putting civilians at risk. Blending into civilian populations to attack can cause civilians to be mistaken for combatants and lose protection, making such tactics illegal in many situations. 10. Just following orders is not a defense. Individuals are personally responsible for war crimes they commit. Claiming that a superior ordered the act does not absolve responsibility. This principle exists to prevent atrocities carried out through blind obedience and to reinforce moral and legal accountability. 11. Booby-trapping everyday objects is illegal. Disguising explosives as toys, food, medical supplies, or religious items is forbidden because civilians, especially children, are likely to interact with them. These devices are indiscriminate and continue to kill and injure long after fighting ends. 12. Starving civilians as a method of warfare is prohibited. Using hunger or deprivation to force civilian populations into submission is illegal. Blocking food, water, medicine, or humanitarian aid intentionally causes mass suffering and death. Even during sieges, civilians must be protected. 13. Attacking retreating soldiers can become illegal. If enemy forces are clearly retreating, surrendering, or no longer capable of fighting, continued attacks may violate the laws of war. Combat must stop once the enemy is hors de combat or no longer poses a threat. 14. Causing widespread, long-term, and severe environmental damage is forbidden. Weapons or tactics that devastate ecosystems, poison water supplies, or destroy farmland on a massive scale are restricted or banned. Environmental destruction can harm civilian populations for generations and is increasingly recognized as a serious war crime. 15. Neutral countries' territory and property must be respected. Neutral states must not be drawn into conflicts. Using their land, airspace, or infrastructure for military purposes violates international law and risks expanding the conflict unlawfully. 16. Pillage and looting are illegal. Taking civilian property for personal gain, whether during combat or occupation, is prohibited. Looting undermines civilian survival, fuels lawlessness, and has been recognized as a war crime for centuries. 17. Humanitarian aid must be allowed. Warring parties must allow neutral humanitarian organizations to assist civilians. While reasonable security checks are permitted, deliberately blocking aid to cause suffering or gain leverage is illegal. 18. Declaring or ordering no prisoners is illegal. Orders to kill enemy fighters instead of accepting surrender violate the obligation to protect those who lay down arms. Such orders encourage massacres and are explicitly banned under the laws of war. 19. The dead must be treated with respect. The dead must not be mutilated, desecrated, or used for propaganda. Parties must attempt to identify remains, return bodies when possible, and inform families. Respect for the dead helps preserve human dignity even in war. 20. Spies must receive a fair trial if captured. While espionage is not protected like lawful combat, captured spies still have basic legal rights. They cannot be tortured or summarily executed and must receive a fair trial before punishment. War criminals are judged by national courts, international courts, or special tribunals, depending on the circumstances of the crimes. National courts often prosecute war crimes committed by their own citizens or under universal jurisdiction, which allows some countries to try serious international crimes regardless of where they occurred. At the international level, the International Criminal Court, ICC, prosecutes individuals for war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide when national authorities are unwilling or unable to do so. In some cases, the international community establishes special or hybrid tribunals for specific conflicts. These courts judge individual persons, not states, and official position, such as being a soldier, general, or head of state, does not grant immunity. There are individuals who have already been sentenced for their war crimes. But that topic is for next time. Which of these crimes surprises you the most? Share your thoughts in comments. And please, don't forget to like and subscribe.